And I recall that you had a great deal to do with the presentation of one of the early documentary films on his life, didn't you, sir?
Yes, I learned a great deal from Tom Edison. I wrote a page story on him, one of a series of interviews that I had with business leaders and outstanding personalities of that time, particularly inventors, people of new ideas. Really following up some of these suppressed desires that I'd had at my father's family table when I was an infant. I sold the Tribune on letting me do a series of that kind in which I could ask the questions. I didn't tell them that I hadn't been allowed to ask when I was 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10 from that standpoint.
Well, sure.
So in interviewing Tom Edison, I learned a good deal, and I wanted a third helping. So I went down and to find out what he then considered his greatest invention. And after showing off my previous knowledge, I discovered that it wasn't at all what I thought, that instead of it being the motion picture or the phonograph or the electric light bulb, that he thought his greatest invention was the central service station from which an entire community or city could draw power, electrical current. Well, I dug up a lot of other things that were surprising, and among them was his concept of the motion picture. And I discovered that he had originally intended that invention to be as an educational tool, and that he had envisioned a transformation in our schools. And he was living without that realization of his dream, and suffering as from the disappointment of seeing it being used for entertainment, which at that time, well, times haven't changed too much, was devoted almost exclusively to love, murder, mystery, crime, and sex that isn't crime exactly. Well, that sort of thing, and he was disappointed. So I immediately thought, well, I wonder if I couldn't save this daughter of yours from the life of shame into which the motion picture industry has led her.
And the perils of Pauline.
And all that sort of thing. And why not have some factual films? One of the earliest was a documentary, a life of Thomas Edison.
And as a matter of fact,
in the silent days.
Wasn't Pancho Villa another of your subjects, sir?
Yes, pursuing factual films and looking for some excitements in it, we and using the Tribune to promote them on a participation or rentals basis, we sent a correspondent down there to talk to Pancho Villa and to get the inside story from him of why he should behave the way he was behaving, how he got that way, and talked to him sympathetically, and he allowed us to take motion pictures. We brought them in and we circulated them in the theaters, and that way broke new ground. We at that time, however, had already pioneered the Selig Tribune News Weekly, which was a presentation of factual material in the theaters. And with the pressure of newspaper publicity, we had demonstrated that people were also interested in the facts of life as well as the facts of life as they, quote, unquote,
yes, unquote,
presented them.
Mr. Handy, you have, during your very, very interesting and colorful and productive years in this business, done so many things. I'd like to ask a question, and I mean not to be a provocative one necessarily, but if you and I were to meet on a train or today possibly in a jet airplane and we got to chatting and I said to you, Mr. Handy, what do you do? How would you describe your occupation?
Well, you might have something entirely new, and I might hear something entirely new. I experimented along that line once. It is a difficult business to describe because we set out to accelerate the processes of education, and we interpret that term very broadly, and also to make them more pleasant. I always loved to learn, but I hated to study. And I thought there might be a lot of other people like that. So I could describe our business in terms of, well, we could just use that phrase. What we do is accelerate education. The chances are I'd get some more questions. I've discovered that. Or I might say our job is to make education painless. That also has the disadvantage of being an interesting statement that leads to another question.
That is an interesting statement, because a number of years ago you made one very close to that, I think, when you said that education should be a pleasure and not a pain in the head.
Pain in the head. And it can even become a pain at the neck if you let that headache continue long enough. That's as a matter of fact. Well, I once gave myself the challenge of stating that differently every time.
This question of mine, you mean?
Yes,
someone
short
would ask
question.
you?
What's the business? Giving a different answer each time. At the same time, see that that answer was explicit, that it was true, and that it was succinct. And for a whole year, I stuck to that resolution. Every time I was had a seatmate on a plane, I fly about 75,000 miles a year, have for, I suppose 30 years. I would give a different answer to that question. I even made the game harder for myself by always asking my seatmate what was his business, so that he would have to ask me. And you know that for that entire year, and I suppose I must have answered the question, well, at least 180 times in the 360 days that I was moving around on trains and planes. I gave a different answer every time, and it was a true answer.
Well, that's, of course, I'm not surprised.
Each time.
Mr. Handy, there are so many interesting facets that I want to be sure we at least touch on this afternoon. And you pointed out earlier that you came from a family of 7, and of course I know that Mr. Jamison Handy has a family of his own, but I don't know what it numbers and what these people do, and I'd like to hear a little bit about them.
Well, I have 5 of them, and none of them are in my business, excepting that one of my daughters earns some extra money by teaching in class, elementary school. I have another son who is a business executive. He's been a salesman and a sales manager. I have one who has no use for business. He thinks it's a pain in the neck. And I have I have a daughter who's given me grandchildren.
Wonderful. And
as a matter of fact, a great-grandson.
You're away from home, as you pointed out so much, that I'm told that Mrs. Handy has made up for some of the lost time when you didn't go back to the University of Michigan, and has a kind of hobby of her own of going to school.
Well, she likes continuing education, and I think I finally sold her on education. Maybe I didn't. You know, women sell themselves and sometimes can let you think you've contributed to their education. Sincerely, and maybe you have a little bit.
Hope so.
But about 10 years ago, she started going to college. She's slightly my junior, but not very much. And she's been going to college ever since, although she's earned a sabbatical holiday. And she's not going to college this semester, but she's gone to a number of colleges. I am away from home, but she will come and stay with me. As a commitment, she always keeps it. Any time I stay in the same place, we'll stay in the same place for 2 weeks. That seldom happens. I'm going to be in Detroit all this week, but that puts her pretty well in the clear.
Well,
on the other hand, it interrupts her education. She went to summer school at Columbia one year, and I think it was about an 8-week term, and I complicated things by staying here for a couple of weeks. So out of the 8 weeks, she missed 2, but she succeeded in getting an A. I'm quite proud of that.
I would be indeed.
On a condensed or fast course.